Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network. Hard talk with a matrix of newsmakers. The headlines. For a year and a half, the EU and U.S. have tried to reach a deal to slash trade barriers and give both economies a shot in the arm. Some say time's running out. Political battles at home are keeping the world's largest trading partners from clinching the agreement while they reach trade deals with Asia and elsewhere. Italy's trade envoy says the window of opportunity for the talks slams shut at the end of 2015, when the U.S. election campaign makes trade too hot to touch. Sticking points include genetically modified food, financial regulations, energy and maritime exports. Is there hope, or will the EU and U.S. never see eye to eye? Wired into this edition of the network here at the European Parliament in Brussels, Arnaldo Abruzzini, Secretary General of Eurochambre, representing 1,700 chambers of commerce across Europe. He says such an accord would be the crown jewel of the EU's trade agenda. Magda Stoczkiewicz, Director of Friends of the Earth Europe, which has warned against a potentially toxic trade deal. And Denis Redonnet, who's TTIP negotiator, that's the trade talks negotiator, one of them anyway. You're a DG Trade at the European Commission. A question to all of you, starting with Arnaldo. Who will this accord really help? There could be some winners and losers here. You probably well know them. This is a Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP. We call it TTIP, some of us. Who's going to be the winners and losers with TTIP?
If there is one single segment that would be winning about the striking of the deal between EU and US, that segment will be about the small and medium-sized businesses. Those are the ones that will need more support to increase their capacity to export and invest in both markets.
But we have more than 1 million signatures out there of people who are upset about this. Magda, who do you think is going to win and lose in this?
Well, definitely people are rightly upset because there are a lot of concerns, and we believe that the losers are going to be actually European and the US citizens, their health, their protection of as consumers, also labor workers who will lose, and the environment. And for us, this is a definitely big concern. And I would disagree with Arnaldo that small and medium-sized enterprises are going to win. They will be pushed off the market by companies that will trade and bring products from the US to Europe.
Denis, is there a danger that the big guys are going to crush the little guys?
Look, we think both firms and citizens and consumers can stand to gain from this agreement. Citizens through greater choice, lower prices, and firms, not just the big guys who trade already, but those at the smaller end who don't actually trade yet and who are going to get the information, the access that they do not have today, and that is principally the SME sector.
Okay, now, Denis, now this is a question for Arnaldo, but your commission has estimated that there could be a 0.5% bounce in GDP from TTIP. Arnaldo, do you think that's realistic?
I think that this is realistic, but what is realistic even more in my mind is that if we were going to help the large amount of small business getting through the ocean, that will benefit the consumers, because this is what we are already benefiting from the global approach of our economy. Lower price, better products.
Okay, do you see it that way, Magda?
Not really. If you look at the submissions of the companies to the negotiations, it's very clear that it's about deregulation, about stopping the GMO labeling, about stopping the certain proactive way the EU protects its citizens. And we are afraid that this is going to only become bigger.
Okay, so there could actually be compromise here. We'll have to find some kind of common ground. Does that mean compromising the regulations, some of the tougher regulations that the Europeans have as opposed to the Americans?
No, we need to make compromise in trade negotiation to give access to each other's markets. That does not mean that we're going to deregulate or lower our standards. Public regulators on both sides of the Atlantic regulate in the public interest. They have no mandate to do anything different out of TTIP.
Okay, well, what about, here's one example, the EU's so-called REACH list of potentially hazardous chemicals is said to be tougher than the so-called TASCA list in the States. Arnaldo, do you think there will be some bending there?
The worst thing that a small business could face is a double standard set. I mean, this is what we need to avoid, because if we go that way, we double the cost for any small business.
Okay, so you want to see a common regulatory ground, but who's going to give that?
A common approach, not a common regulatory. I mean, we have plenty of examples where the aim of the two regulatory bodies are very much the same, but because they regulate in a different way, we do have a different approach.
Okay, Magda, where do you stand?
Well, this is only a theory. The practice is different because there are big differences. REACH is the most modest way of approaching chemicals. The last time a chemical was banned in the US was 1991. The Environmental Protection Agency was sued in that time, and they lost, and never ever since the chemicals were banned. So we are talking about two very different systems.
Okay, and there's another rather emotional issue, I believe, is GMOs, is genetically modified food. And some in Europe are worried that this is going to be some backdoor way for genetically modified food to come into Europe. Or is that maybe a good thing, as some people believe? Denis?
No, it would not be a good thing, but our basic legislations on food safety will not be on the table of this negotiation.
So how are you going to reach a trade accord if you don't agree on these certain fundamental things?
Well, we have regulatory differences between the EU and the US, which are of a very different nature. In some cases, we have different policy objectives. Where that's the case, we're not going to reach mutual recognition or equivalence. But there are also regulatory divergences between us, which are linked to unintended consequences of doing regulations differently, simply because we have not so far cooperated between regulators. That's the zone where we want to work on.
Okay, do you believe that there's this window of opportunity for this accord, Arnaldo? If we make it in 2015, great, but if we don't, is there a lot to lose?
Of course, there might be barriers, and we know that the electoral campaigns always create barriers to agreements. But the reasoning behind this is that if we really believe that we could set the standards for the next generation of the global trade and investment agreement in the world, that should be done now between EU and US.
Magda, should we take it or leave it? I mean, if we don't, there could be other bilateral accords that could leave Europe behind, no?
Well, I disagree. The EU has trade agreements with many countries, and many of the member states have agreements with the US. The thing is that this is a deal like no other. This is not about trade tariffs. This is about deregulation or regulatory coherence. And it's very easy to make it wrong and lose whatever we achieved in this area for the last 20, 30 years in the EU.
Denis, how much pressure do you see on this?
Well, we think we have a window of opportunity now. We have the possibility still today to have the EU and the US work together to remain global standard setters, and that means in 2015 making as much progress as we possibly can. We have on the Commission side a unanimous mandate from member states for doing so.
But do you think the window slams shut ahead of the US elections?
The electoral cycle makes a trade negotiation always more difficult. We just have to make sure we plow on this year and start getting good results.
Okay, and quickly, one last question is, a lot of people say that this kind of trade accord will drive a nail into the coffin of the Doha trade talks, where we should be really lowering the barriers across the board in the world. Arnaldo, how do you see that?
Well, I think that this kind of bilateral large trade agreement are there because we have been unsuccessful on Doha negotiations. But if I can just disagree with Magda, I mean, we do not have to play on fears of people. We should stick to the reality. And this is where this TTIP is about.
Okay, but Magda, does this not leave the developing world behind?
No, not at all, because we are leading in many ways in our technologies, and I think Europe can lead if it transforms into low carbon economy. But this is not going to be done through this deal. This is a deal for big multinationals, and a lot to lose for the consumers and for the citizens and the environment.
Denis, last word. Does this mean Doha's dead and the developing world could be at risk with this?
We want the WTO to work, but it is quite clear that right now we can make progress with the United States. We can make progress and go beyond what is being negotiated in WTO in order at a later stage to bring it back to the WTO. That's what we're going to want to do.
Denis, thanks very much. Thanks to all of you. Sorry we're out of time. I'd like to thank our guests, Arnaldo Abruzzini, Magda Stoczkiewicz, and Denis Redonnet. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.